Hello everybody, it's Tommy and welcome back to another speed build for the Disney Save. Today we are going to be working on another Mulan themed build, and this is for the Huns, specifically Shan, who is the main villain character from Mulan. This will be his residential, along with a couple of other Hun characters that are sort of in the background of the movie but never actually get named that I am going to be adding as extra characters here, just so that he's not living alone and there's more of a group, because we did want to go ahead and make the Huns their own club as well, so it makes a lot more sense if there's quite a few of them. But we are working on a very limited lot here. It is a 20 by 15, one of the smallest lot types that we have, so I couldn't go crazy with the amount of characters, and I also really don't love to add a lot of unnamed characters to the Disney Save. It can really quickly get overwhelming and sort of feel like it's losing some of the recognition of like a lot of the main characters, and we're gonna have so many characters to come, I just really can't be adding like a ton of unnamed inside characters. So we decided to go with Shan Yu, the main villain, and then I'm going to be adding 3 others that will be all living on this lot. So the main tent in the middle is Shan Yu's. It has its own private area where he can sort of plan for battles and is kind of the main tent, very similar to how Shang had his, where he had this like map table on the floor and weapons area, maybe like a little bit of a sparring area. That is the big main tent in the center. He also has his own private bedroom and bathroom, as would probably be pretty typical for his character and the ranking of his character. And then the other 3 characters are actually going to live in the tent that is off to the far right with the extra little bump out tent on the side of it. That is a very small bedroom combined with a very tiny bathroom. And then a little bit towards the middle of the video, I did add one more tent sort of in the front left of the lot, and that is going to serve as the kitchen. So we are building another campground today, and I did recently do that when I built Shang's campground, but they are very different from one another. Shang's was based after some of the scenes from the movie that take place in the training grounds and a lot of the make a man out of you scenes and all of that kind of stuff. So we had some really great reference from the movie, and something that I noticed a lot when doing that was that their camps were very structured. All of the tents are perfectly lined up. There wasn't a lot along the perimeter as far as protecting them from the outside world. It was a lot of like handmade fences, and it felt very clean, very limited, and ready to be picked up and go whenever you need to. This is actually based after a Mongolian camp. So one of my patrons threw some really great references into one of my discords of some Mongolian style camps, which is what the Huns are based after. And the biggest differences that I saw were firstly the round tent. So I wanted to make sure that we went ahead and used some kind of round tent here. We cannot do perfectly round rooms currently in The Sims, so we are kind of limited to doing these hexagon or octagon shaped rooms with domed roofs over the top. But I think it ended up working out in the end. I used a lot of curtains and blankets and sort of drapery around the interior and exterior to kind of give it a little bit more dimension and make it feel a little bit more like an actual tent instead of how I did it previously with Shang's, where I just sort of painted the walls. This has a little bit more dimension to it. The other really big thing that I noticed was that they were big fans of using the surrounding terrain to sort of use it as a barrier and kind of hide themselves in like the natural landscaping. So it looked like almost that they had found an area where it was dug out in the center and everything around it was completely surrounded, be it by boulders or larger hills or trees or whatever. And then where there were areas that were sort of missing as far as protection goes, they had a lot of homemade spiked fences and some taller like lookout towers kind of going around. So it felt more sort of in the land, and I also felt like terrain was going to be a really big important thing for this build. But because we're working on such a small lot, this is a 20 by 15, it does mean that I wasn't able to use terrain here the way that I probably would have if we had like a really big 50 by 50. I would have made like a very intricate camp, but as was the saying with Shang's, we sort of had to put it here for a few reasons, and we didn't have the space to be doing these very intricate campgrounds with tons and tons of tents and terrain as well. Terrain is already very difficult to use, and I find that it's almost impossible to use it very well on some of these smaller lots. So instead I did opt for some debug boulders and rocks to sort of close it in, and I think it looks a lot cleaner. It looks a lot better than I think some of the terrain probably would have looked in this circumstance. I'm not in love with the particular lot that this ended ended up going on, because it does have this natural gravel stone path out in the front of the lot that very much screams like maybe more traditional residential to go here, but it's one of those things where you have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit and just ignore it, because it just had to go here. So basically, if you're not aware, the reason that it was really important that this build went here is because we basically had these 3 lots at the bottom of Mount Komorebi in the same area where Mulan's family lives. And one of my patrons had a really, really great idea from the beginning of planning Mount Komorebi, which was basically to have the Huns and Shang live sort of near each other or across from one another. And then another thing that I always really wanted to do from the beginning was a Mulan-themed gym. And probably some kind of outdoor gym. We can base it a little bit after some of the training scenes from the movie, as well as like the battleground scenes from the movie. So he actually had the idea to have the Huns and Shang be sort of like 2 separate clubs. So we have the Huns that are one club with Shen Yu and the 3 others. And then we have Shang's soldiers. And that club is comprised of Shang, Mulan, and the 3 main soldier characters from Mulan. And they're going to be sort of like rivaling clubs, and they all live in the same area. So Shang's camp is actually over to the far left. You might even see it in the background of the video a little bit here and there as we go throughout the speed build. This is located on the far right, and then in the middle we have a little bit of a larger lot where we're going to be doing the outdoor gym that will be based on the battleground. And that gym will serve as the club hangout spot for both clubs. So they'll both sort of be forced to go there, and they'll want to go there. They'll be like inclined to want to hang out on that lot. And they'll also really dislike one another, which is kind of fun for the movie, but also adding a little bit of lore to the Disney save as well. And it was just a really cool opportunity to do something a little bit special for Mulan and kind of fun, and something that we haven't done for the save file so far. So we had to make all of these lots fit in this very designated area, which meant that with Shang's camp and this one as well, I did have to size down some of the ideas and do like not a fully fledged camp, but almost like a piece of it. And I think it kind of works. It looks really, really cute. These builds were very quick for me, which is always nice. Same with Shang's. I didn't want to overclutter, but I felt like with this one, maybe we could get away with a little bit more clutter than Shang's, whereas that one was very structured and put together. This felt a little bit more messy, and maybe you would have some random things sort of hanging around, and the tents aren't perfectly all lined up exactly how you would see them in like perfect rows. There's sort of no order to it, especially because they are sort of filling in the landscaping around. So they probably would have found like a really great area and just had to like kind of pop up tents in a designated space. So they can't really control how they're going to structure everything. So it's a very different camping type of experience, but it was also fun to just like make another camp. I find these builds to be really, really fun. It gets me excited for some stuff that we would potentially have in the future. Now, something else that was really cool about these Mongolian camps that I wasn't able to replicate perfectly, but I wanted to give a general idea, or at least a shout out to the idea of, is the fact that they are sort of made out of netting or wire, and they had these like dome shapes to them, but the roof had a hole right through the middle, similar to kind of like a teepee. And this is obviously so that in each tent, they probably had a fire pit right in the middle to sort of warm the tent, and then the smoke could come out of the little hole that was in the middle. Because of the way that the roofing works, I couldn't find a way to do this that I felt like would actually be okay. There's kind of ways that you can push certain roofs up inside one another and make it look a little bit strange, but I felt like it would look really chunky and weird. So instead I opted for the idea of, I guess, the concept by putting the fires on the roof, which was more just because in the pictures and the references that I was seeing, a lot of them sort of came to this hole in the roof, but there was a lot of like branches and stuff sticking out of that area. So I wanted to have, I guess, just the idea of it. So I added those little bits to the top to sort of replicate it in any way that we could. And it was also my way of giving a shout out to the idea without having to put a fireplace in every single one of these tents, because although that would probably be true for the real Mongolian camps, I couldn't get that to function very well when it comes to The Sims. The Sims would have a field day about walking around these fire pits, and I knew that we were working on very limited space considering the size of some of these tents, and we wanted to make sure we got functioning beds and all sorts of stuff in here. So instead, I just opted for the idea of putting the little coffee table stacked with the fire pit on top, and I think it's kind of cute. It's a little bit unique. It's definitely something else that adds a different sort of charm to this camp compared to Shang's as well. Now, I did add a couple of little things to this lot just to give your Sims something to do so that they are not so bored. They are going to have the training ground or outdoor gym to the left of them, so that'll be probably a pretty busy area, and I can imagine that they're going to want to go over there pretty frequently. A lot of these characters are very active Sims and training and stuff like that, so it will kind of go hand in hand with the area, and I think that if anything, you will be able to find some stuff to do. But I always get a little bit worried when it comes to these very simplistic type of lots about your Sims getting bored. So I did go ahead or I'm going to be going ahead and adding horseshoes to the outside of the lot using the tool mod as soon as the Sims pack, the new one, comes out and the updates for everything come out with that, because that's going to be a pretty big update to the game, and I know that basically all mods are going to break, as they usually do when we get a new pack that adds a lot of different features to the game and the updates. So I'm gonna wait for all of that stuff to go through, and then I'd love to be able to come back and add some stuff with Tool. I also wanted to do it for Shang's as well. I did talk about that. You should definitely go check out that video if you haven't seen it already, because it's really, really similar, but it also has a lot of different elements, and I think that it's kind of fun to be able to compare the two. Now, there will be a little bit of a bigger cut in the video in a moment here. I did go into debug and find a bunch of stuff for landscaping and just add some little details to the outside of this. There is a small area around the side of the tent where the other characters are going to be sleeping. There was just like this little area, so I decided to add a picnic table, which I know is not really something that you might see for something like this. If anything, they're probably sitting on a lot of stumps and rocks and the ground, but I felt like maybe they just needed something to go eat dinner on. I don't know. Sometimes I try to think about like the practicality of some of these lots and just making it the most functional that it can possibly be, while still obviously maintaining like the integrity of the movie and whatnot, but I like to add little things like that. There was a lot of like drapery and layering and awnings as well with these camps. So I did use the ones from Island Living, which I kind of forget that those are in game, but they came in really useful for a little awning to go out front of this main tent here, but also to cover up the picnic table in the back, and it's a cool little detail. You'll be able to see it a little bit more when we zoom out here for some of the interior building, as well as screenshots, of course, that are included at the end of the video. Now for the interior. So one of my favorite things to do when it comes to these camp builds is making these little like war room map replica tables where they plan out like strategy for the war. This is something that was shown in Mulan for Shang's camp, and I made one in there that was very similar to what was shown in the movie. But because we don't have any references for the Huns, I had a lot more creative freedom when it came to doing what I wanted to do here, and I decided that it made a lot of sense that obviously the Huns are going to be strategic as well. They're depicted in the movie as being very scary, and obviously something that the soldiers are worried about having to take on. So I think that the Huns would be very strategic, and I think that I wanted to add some elements that showed that. So I just think it made a lot of sense to include a similar type of table here, but I was able to put my own spin on it and add some more stuff, including like some pawns that I had found from the Star Wars pack and some little like more colorful rocks and bits from the Mount Komorebi pack, as well as like a sculpture item that is like trees and sticks and having them all sized down as little items that can go on the table. It's a lot more colorful than the one that I did in Shang's tent, but I think I like it a lot better here. I think it's really, really fun. But I also just wanted to use this space, I felt like, as a general planning area and room for Shen Yu and some of probably the other important characters in his camp and in his little group that would be helpful in planning out war efforts and strategy and stuff like that. So similar idea to what we have with Shang, but it's almost done in a more detailed sort of way, I guess because I was able to do my own thing here. But overall, like I said, I did try to keep the same concept that this is a camp. This is something that the characters would likely be sort of assembling over a few days. It would have to be be mobile. They're probably going to pack a lot of this stuff up and bring it with them. So you're not going to have a lot of items that are hard to carry and travel with. You're not going to see like full-fledged items, like more decorated furniture items that you would see in a typical residential. This is a lot of like stuff from the land or things that can sort of be left behind, and there's no real issue with it. But it did seem, from what I could see from the Mongolian camp references, that they still had a lot of like really cool stuff. And I don't want it to be completely boring, so we do have to add a little bit of detail here and there and things that I felt like were cool, including the flags that I've used all over the camp, which are actually from the Star Wars pack. Sometimes I'm a little bit worried about using those flags from the Star Wars pack because some of them are actually logos from the Star Wars universe. I think they probably all are, and I'm not aware of every single one of them. And when I was live, I was kind of asking people if they knew what that logo was because I was worried that it was related to something that I wouldn't really want to associate with the Huns or with Mulan. But I felt like that was one that could actually kind of work. And then we have Shan Yu's room. Very simple. Again, he has the nicest bed on the lot, of course. Very limited as far as what I could pick for beds for him. And I would have loved to have been able to have something that felt more handmade with like lots of homemade furs layered on it, similar to how I did the carpeting in his room. Something more medieval, of course. If we ever get a medieval pack, I am going to love the day that I get to come back and update some of these builds, hopefully with some more stuff like that. Or I probably could have gone with like almost a mat on the floor, but I just felt like because he's sort of the head of the group that we have to give him something a little bit nicer. So I opted for a black bed that has a lot of drapery on it, which is from Island Living. It's not my favorite choice, but again, it's one of those ones where you just sort of have to make it and deal with it, as well as using a lot of the homemade bathroom items that you can make with the woodworking table, which really come in handy for builds like this. It feels like something that you would have for a lot like this. There is another bathroom on this lot. It is connected to the soldiers' tent as a separate private bathroom for them, so they're not going to have to go into Shan Yu's tent to use the bathroom, which was really important to me. And it's decorated almost identically the same with very limited furniture and basically no like decorations or anything like that, so I did go ahead and cut that. Now, we did use the bunk beds in this tent, which is really fun. I haven't been able to use the bunk beds in the save files so far. Those were added in a base game patch somewhat recently. We don't have a ton of choices, but the new Sims 4 pack that is the designer pack, I don't actually know what it's called off the top of my head, but it's like an interior design game pack. I saw some stuff from that, and that's going to be coming with a couple of new bunk bed swatches, and some of them looked a lot better for this build. So I'm probably going to be coming back and updating these bunk beds with one of the newer ones when that pack comes out, especially because you can actually change the beds out from the bunk bed, but you can only change one of them. So if I wanted to use the darker brown wood swatch, which of course I do because I'm trying to get a lot of like handmade and darker woods and more natural looking stuff for this build, you are also stuck with whatever bed swatch is matching that, and then you would want to match the bed on the bottom as well. Maybe not, but I felt like for this build we would probably want to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and look through that and maybe come back and update this build pretty quickly from the new pack, but we will see. And then lastly, we have the final tent, which is serving as the little kitchen. Similar idea to what we did with Shang's camp. I am taking some coffee tables and making kind of like a stacked shelf, and this is a really fun coffee, or this is an end table I should say. This comes with the Snowy Escape pack, and the reason I like this table so much is because it has a lot of placement tiles on it, which means that the items snap to certain areas on it, and there's a lot of them. Some of the earlier stuff that comes with this game does not have the proper tile placement set up, so your items snap really weird, and it's kind of annoying, especially when you're trying to be a little bit faster, because I am live when I'm building a lot of this stuff. So I wanted to be able to assemble something where we can layer a lot of little clutter items onto a shelf pretty easily. And again, I'm thinking pretty limited here. We have to have a counter in here just because that's how the game functions. Otherwise, I really would not opt to do counters in a tent. It doesn't really make sense. But we can't really be hanging a lot of stuff off of the walls either. If anything, we could get away with probably hanging some stuff from the ceiling, but I didn't think that we had too many items that I felt really good about using in here. So instead, I'm just going for a super minimalistic look with like basic ingredients, things that I felt like might be used for like spices, medicine. This is probably the tent as well as like the kitchen, the functioning kitchen that your Sims are going to need to survive here. As far as the movie goes and camps in general. This is probably where they keep a lot of general supplies. This could even probably serve as like the medical tent. So random clutter stuff. And then basically the only old stove that we have in game. It'd be so nice to get a newer one meaning a new old style stove. We did get one with the new kitchen kit, but it's way too nice to use in here, so I usually opt for this one that kind of works. But again, we would love to use like a fireplace, right, and be able to kind of make everything over the fire and put a fire in the middle of the room. But we just gotta trade out some of the functionality aspects sometimes when it comes to doing these builds. And that is the end of today's speed build. Let me know what you thought of the Huns camp in the comment section down below, and stay tuned for the Hun Create Sim that should be coming out later in the week, as well as some Mulan townies that should be out later in the week towards Monday, Tuesday as well. If you would like to support the Disney Save on Patreon, you can do so by clicking the link in my description box down below or the one at the end of the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Hit that little bell icon below to turn on post notifications so you can get updated every single time I post, and I will talk to you all in the next one.